Hey everybody, Foley here. Welcome to the weekly news recap for the 7th to the 13th of July 2025. So this week we're going to talk about what's going on over at Unknown Worlds vis-a-vis the Subnautica 2 game. So last week we heard that Krafton had parachuted in a new CEO for Unknown Worlds. Krafton acquired Unknown Worlds around 2021, just shortly after the original Subnautica went live, and did really, really well. Krafton bought them up then. And what we had heard is that Steve Paputzis had been put in as CEO. He was formerly CEO of Striking Distance. He was formerly studio lead, I think, of Visceral Games. Both two studios that were shut down. EA shut down Visceral Games after Dead Space 3 didn't make all of the money. And Krafton, I don't think Striking Distance is shut down, but I think it's like on the way out or something like that. Because Callisto Protocol didn't make all of the money. Anyway, at the same time, we heard that the original founders of Unknown Worlds left the studio around the same time, and I suggested that this was probably like forcibly pushed out. We didn't know at the time if they were fired or if they had voluntarily chosen to leave or what have you. It seems more likely that they were fired at this point now. So, first story we have here is former Unknown Worlds creative director says departure was quite a shock. So this is Charlie Cleveland. He's a creative director for Subnautica 2 and co-founder of Unknown Worlds. He was sharing a post over on the Subnautica subreddit to basically say that, yeah, I was kind of shocked, honestly, to be let go. Also claiming that Subnautica 2 is ready for early access, so it should only be a matter of time. Back in April, Unknown Worlds did release kind of like a press release, whatever, to say that, yeah, there'd be early access, like soon, later on in 2025. Anyway, the release schedule of the game was going to be the team's decision, but now Krafton have taken it into their own hands, so they don't know when exactly the game will be released. After all these years, to find that I'm no longer able to work at the company I started stings. Whatever happens to the founders, to the team, and to the game, our priority is and has always been to make the best damn game we can for the best community in the world. Which is kind of a echoing of what we discovered, I suppose, about Battlefield 5 and DICE, and how the developers at DICE weren't interested in like quarterly earnings and all that shit. They just wanted to make a good game, and how that was like a culture clash because EA don't care about a good game, really. They care about money. Anyway, the publisher has provided no reason for these changes being the CEOs, co-founders, etc., all being pushed out. Anyway, that was the beginning of the week. Then a lot of shit happened, basically. So this is from Jason Schreier, Bloomberg article. You know, if it's a Jason Schreier thing, there's some fucking bullshit going on. Anyway, Krafton delays Subnautica 2 game ahead of $250 million payout. So the short of this is, if Subnautica 2 was released in 2025 and made X amount of sales, made X amount of revenue, the developers at Unknown Worlds were going to come in for a $250 million bonus that was going to be distributed amongst the studio. They've now since delayed the game to 2026, which means it's impossible for them to make a revenue goal for 2025. Pretty much. So, like, there's no way for them to make that bonus now. So it certainly seems like when it was going to be coming time for the game to be released into early access, they had a lot of wish lists. The original game sold like 6 million units or something. They were easily going to make the revenue requirement. So it seems like right now that Krafton parachuted in their CEO because the original CEO and the original creative director were going to push the game out to early access, probably get that bonus. Krafton would have to pay it out. And instead, they couldn't convince the CEO and the creative director to delay early access, for obvious reasons. So they fired them. That's what it sounds like. Anyway, Krafton Inc. is delaying the release of the highly anticipated survival game Subnautica 2 just months before it was due to pay a $250 million bonus to the development team. The second most wished for game on the PC platform Steam, so currently it's quite high up there on wish lists. Anyway, the schedule changed last week after Krafton might be a better name for them, pushed out the leadership of its Unknown Worlds Entertainment studio, which was, again, going back from the first guy, Crawford, kind of a shock. Anyway, Krafton says that it was not influenced by any contractual or financial considerations. Yeah, sure. Sure, Rummy. Anyway, first Subnautica, released in 2018, was a smash indie hit, selling more than 6 million copies. Three years later, Krafton purchases Unknown Worlds at an enterprise value of 500 million, so it is assumed that that's how much they paid for them. We don't know the exact number. It said afterwards that a sequel was in the works. The sequel's delay was against the wishes of the studio's former leadership, so it's assumed that that's the reason they were pushed out, because they wouldn't agree to delay the game and essentially forego the $250 million bonus. If Unknown Worlds had hit revenue targets by the end of 2025, they would have come in for this $250 million bonus. Unknown Worlds leadership planned to share the additional money with all of the studio's employees, which number around 100 staff, so that's a pretty significant payout. Like, if you assume they divide it all up evenly, 250 million divided by 100, like 2.5 million each. Gee, that's like life-changing money. Anyway, staff who were at the company at the time of the acquisition were told they were eligible for bonuses ranging from hundreds of thousands of dollars to 7 figures, the people said. So probably wasn't going to be evenly distributed, but still, 6 figures. Anyway, Krafton didn't say why it made a leadership change. I think we can probably figure out why now. But anyway, it said in a press release that we owe our players nothing less than the best possible game as soon as possible, which one would suggest early access then. So stick to the schedule. As far as the development team was concerned, it was ready. Okay, anyway. So Krafton alleges, and this has been corroborated later, that the company said 90% of the $250 million payout was allocated to Unknown Worlds' 3 senior leaders. Krafton accuses the executives of abandoning their responsibilities in order to work on other projects, which is some pretty, libel, slander, maybe, if that's not true. We'll come back to that in a second. The 90% going to studio leadership. Studio leadership have come back. Former studio leadership did come back to say that, yes, that is true, but at no point did we ever intend to keep all of that money. And from, if we're saying that people were assuming bonuses of 6 figures, 7 figures, then yeah, they weren't planning to keep, certainly weren't planning to keep all of it anyway. This is from Krafton. We are deeply disappointed by the former leadership's conduct, and above all, we feel a profound betrayal by their failure to honor the trust placed in them by our fans. Krafton? Whose fans, exactly? Didn't you come in 3 years after the first game was released? They're not your fans, bro. They're not your fans at all. Anyway, new CEO Steve Papuzza said he was not familiar with the specifics on the contract. Now, he could just be playing dumb, which is probably the right move for him right now. Or he might not have been told. Anyway, so from Steve Papuzza, the desire of Krafton is to have the very best version of Subnautica 2 available for its early access. They're alleging that it's not in a good enough state to be released into early access. A team that is not the developers. This is the publishing team who are on the hook for $250 million if it does go out to early access. Anyway, he added, it's never been told to me that we're making this change specifically to impact any earnout or anything like that. So again, the wording here, it was never specifically told to me. Could just be that they didn't come out and outright tell him that's the reason. But you can read between the lines here. Anyway, it is in his best interest to play stupid at this point. Don't get involved in this, because Subnautica 2 Saga just keeps getting messier amid new lawsuit and alleged leaks. So yes, that slanderous libel thing that they said, yeah, they're getting sued because of it. Anyway, the veteran game developers are now suing publisher Krafton over their dismissals. We're now filed a lawsuit against Krafton. The details should eventually become public. You all deserve the full story. This is Charlie Cleveland again, creative director, former creative director. Suing a multi-billion-dollar company in a painful, public, and possibly protracted way was certainly not on my bucket list, but this needs to be made right. Subnautica has been my life's work, and I would never willingly abandon it or the amazing team that has poured their hearts into it. So from, like, again, we don't know the exact ins and outs of what's actually going on in the background, but it certainly seems like from that team, they seem pretty tightly knit. They made, a lot of sales of the original game. They could have fucked off with the money, and they didn't. They stuck around to make the sequel. Publicly have stated that they had planned to share the bonus money and so on. And from, like, the sounds of it, they seem like they're, genuine. Like, I don't want to be on the side of, looking at a David and Goliath thing sort of situation, but it seems like they're kind of in the right here. Anyway, Krafton says it did not fire them to avoid the payout, but because the founders failed to deliver a launch-quality version of Subnautica 2 as promised. Cleveland, who directed the first game, has for his part claimed the game was ready. So he has, remember, the subreddit post where he said that, yeah, it's totally ready for early access. Now, a launch-quality version, and I've taken a bit of, umbrage with how some of the bigger publishers characterize early access. And to be fair, the way early access games are reviewed doesn't do the service any justice. Like, the whole point of early access, at the beginning, anyway, it's definitely not this anymore, but the whole point of it was to get players involved early in the game process, not waiting for the time when you would normally bring in playtesters, which is effectively when the game is pretty much done and you're expecting to just tweak a few things based back on feedback and what have you. You would have had internal playtesters before that who would be brought in quite a bit earlier to kind of fine-tune the basic game mechanics, and then they would be refined, and then you put it out to the public. But at that point, you're not really going to change a whole lot at that stage. And the whole point of early access was to bring people in, one, much earlier in the process, so they could, help direct the development. So it's not just a development team, not being able to see the forest for the trees. They're very deep in the details. They're not seeing the full picture, whereas someone dropping in to play the game would have a better initial impression of the game versus someone who's been developing it for 2 years, And then on top of that, early access had an early revenue thing. So it was also to keep some smaller studios, to be fair. It was to allow small indie teams to take a break from their day job, essentially, to work on this game. And they would get early buy-in from early access players who would effectively be giving a cash injection and allowing them to support themselves while they worked on this game. And that has changed quite a bit since then, because if you get a bad initial impressions thing from early access, this game has launched into early access and it plays like shit and it crashes every 2 seconds, etc., etc., that torpedoes your potential sales and what have you. It is effectively a review at a time where the game isn't really ready for review. So knowing when a game is ready for early access, it really depends on what you think early access is. So you could take, and I think this is Krafton's viewpoint, is that they effectively want the game done by the time it hits early access, and then anything that comes after that is DLC. Really. I think that's the way they want to approach it. And Subnautica, the original game, was not that. It launched in a, not exactly bare bones, it was a decent enough amount of content in the initial early access release, and then they added things over time and then had their 1.0, which is the standard early access approach. So if Subnautica 2 was going to do the same thing, you could potentially have the argument that, people will look at Subnautica, the complete game, and then look at Subnautica 2 and find that, hey, there's way fewer mechanics and what have you at play here. Not putting 2 and 2 together to say that Subnautica 1 is a finished game and Subnautica 2 is an early access, just hit the service thing. Maybe Krafton are looking at it that way. I don't know. but I would also contend that the people who would buy the game in early access probably know that already. Anyway, afterwards, though, there are now leaks of an internal May 2025 milestone that made the assessment that Subnautica 2's early access version was too content light to drive IP growth and expansion. This is coming from Krafton. And calls for 30% more content. What the fuck does that mean? 30% more content, including additional biomes, creatures, and narrative chapters. So they wanted more of the game done before it hit early access. And again, I would argue that's not the point of early access, but early access itself has kind of changed from the beginning. So who's correct here? I don't know, but the fact that, hey, delaying it means we don't have to pay them $250 million. It doesn't make you look great. Anyway, keeping all of that together, Cleveland saying that, I don't want to go up against like this big multi-billion-dollar company, etc. There are kind of like reminders here that this is not the first time like a small development team has had to go up against the multi-billion-dollar owners, effectively. Or founders have had to go up against the new owners, kind of thing. Like Infinity Ward is kind of the poster child for this kind of thing. Vince Zampella, Jason West. With Infinity Ward, they effectively resurrected Call of Duty with Modern Warfare. They were supposed to be getting royalties from that from Activision. Activision just pushed them out of the studio instead. And so they didn't have to pay them royalties. There was a big stink about it. And the Vince Zampella, I think, ended up over in Respawn with EA, and I don't know what happened to Jason West. I think he just left. Anyway, that whole litigation lawsuit also revealed Destiny for the first time. Like, we didn't know Activision were working on it or anything. Remember, Activision did own Bungie at one time. Anyway, unfortunately, though, like inside in the crossfire then is, of course, the like 100 employees who had just been working away on Subnautica 2 and didn't know about any of this background problem with Krafton wanting to push the game out and leadership being adamant that the game was ready for early access and what have you. So hopefully Unknown World's roughly 100 employees are able to still ship a good game and get what they're owed in the process. As for the earnout, the idea that Max, Ted, and I wanted to keep it all for ourselves is totally untrue. Remember, Krafton said like 90% of it was going to them. I'm in this industry because I love it, not for the riches. Historically, we've always shared our profits with the team and did the same when we sold the studio. You can be damn sure we'll continue with the earnout bonus as well. They deserve it for all their incredible work trying to get this great game into your hands. So, like, from their point of view, like, yes, contractually 90% of it was going to them, but they had no intention of keeping it. And I would think legally, I don't know if it's like a tighter legal contract to like name people that the payout would go to rather than just saying like summary employees of Unknown Worlds at this moment in time to this moment in time kind of thing. I don't know if there's like a legal reason why you would name the people, but again, not a lawyer, no idea. Anyway, I'm sure we'll hear more about this later, but right now it seems like Krafton pushed out the original leadership team of Unknown Worlds in order to avoid paying effectively half of what they paid for the studio in the first place. Right? 500 million is what they paid for the studio, and the bonus would have been 250 million. Like, it's pretty sizable, sure, but again, you agreed to it. And it looked like they were going to make it. And you deliberately delayed it so that it, you know, they've delayed the game out to 2026, so they can't possibly make that a target anymore. So it does seem like you were like deliberately trying to avoid paying a bonus. Anyway, elsewhere in the video game world, Sony had a state of play focused directly on Ghost of Yotei, just showing off like what the game is going to be like. It's still very much Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima 2, you could very easily say it that way. But there are some like interesting things that they've changed. So one of the bigger ones is, so there's this kind of really interesting SSD thing they're doing here, which is you have the main character walking back into her childhood home effectively, and they're alleging that with press of a button you can sort of swap between the two different like timelines kind of thing. Now I imagine this is showing off more than anything else, and it's probably restricted to this area and nowhere else. But it's pretty, SSD impressive kind of thing on like this instant loading. And I still kind of feel that for the PS5 and all of its like graphical improvements and what have you, it's the SSD loading times is where that's actually the most impressive thing. I remember playing like the Demon Souls remake for the first time and having it like stepping through fog doors and it being instant, teleporting to different locations. It's like there's no loading screen. Like you just go there straight away. It's incredible. And having to go back to like the PS3 days of like minute long load times for that kind of thing, like it's pretty nuts. Anyway, other kind of things they're showing off for location wise or exploration wise is instead of having the like Ubisoft map porn thing where they just throw a bunch of items on the map, you're gonna have to try to actually look for things. They have this kind of clue card mechanic that's not entirely sure how it works. I think the idea is you sort of just ask for information, clues, interrogate people based on the thing you're actually interested in, and it will show you those points of interest rather than just randomly showing you, the Ubisoft way of synchronize with the tower and just show you everything kind of thing. It's to sort of like direct you. Like if you're only interested in the main plot, just only go for the Oni card. And if you're interested in other things, ask about other things and stuff like that. I think here's they're talking about their bounty system, which is kind of seems like just more like ambient side quests. Altar of Reflection. I forget what the purpose of Altar of Reflection is. It's for learning your new techniques or something like that. Picking things out, again, it's mostly to be like, hey, exploration isn't just open up your map, put a map marker on the thing you want to go to, and then ride towards it. It's more like actually look around in the environment. Again, it's really trying to get away from the sins of a lot of open world games, whereas they just plonk things down on the map and then there's effectively no real exploration going on. So yeah, something that kind of reminded me a little bit of Neo. You have a lot more weapons this time around. Or more specifically, you have more than one weapon. Because I'm trying to remember really hard here, but I don't think you had more than one weapon in the first game. It was just your katana, and you had like different stances. Which was also very Neo, but this time around you have different actual weapons. They're making kind of a big thing that the main character like isn't a samurai, so they're not required to use like very specific samurai weapons. They're also not required to play fair, and so on. So like ninja techniques with the kusarigama here. She has a spear later on. She's like dual wielding katanas here. But it is a kind of similar thing that they had with the original Ghost of Tsushima, which is certain stances are best used against certain enemy types. And similarly here, like dual wielding is best against spears, I think is what they're saying. Kusarigama, I think, is best against like the Odachi because it keeps you really far away from it. That kind of thing. So yeah, she swapped to the spear here. Anyway, different weapons, different kind of like play style. So you're not going to be getting the same way of playing Ghost of Yotei. You can also lose your weapon, and you can also disarm enemies and stuff like that, which is not something you could do in the original game. So that's interesting. And I think they're showing the Odachi here. If you're not familiar with what an Odachi is, it's Sephiroth's sword. Basically, it's just a really, really long katana. And traditionally was used to kill horses. Wasn't actually used for one-on-one combat. I mean, you can use it to do that, but that's not really what it was supposed to be for. Anyway, there's no way she sheathed that sword. Moving on. Other things, you have like thrown weapons. You've ranged weapons, I think, at some point. You have more ranged weapons than you did in the first game. I think Jin only has a bow, I think, in the first game. And in this one, you have a bow and a gun, and you can have throwing knives and stuff like that. There's an interesting camping mechanic here that rather than you having to go to like different shops or fast travel to somebody's location or what have you, you can just camp and they might show up, and I think there's some ability for you to like make sure they show up or something like that. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a little immersion breaking as far as I know. It feels like it's more immersive in that, hey, we're friends, can I share your campfire kind of thing. It's also a bit strange that they like happen to be in the area. I don't know. I guess we'll see what it's like when you're actually playing it. There's a little bit of customization of your gear here, which I don't... You could get like different gear in the first game, but you couldn't like color code it and, you know, have it match like a specific aesthetic you were going for. This obviously won't play in the video because I mute all of our videos, but there's the music here, and it's very good. Photo mode returning. They got a couple of like different kind of cinema styles. So the first game had like Kurosawa mode, which was effectively like monochrome, and like they changed a couple of like particle effects, like wind was a lot stronger and stuff like that. So they're continuing with that. So they're going to continue with Kurosawa mode, but they're also adding a couple of other ones. Mike mode, which is like everything is really dirty and messy, and there's way too much blood and way too much mud, and the camera is really, really close in. And then they have like a lo-fi beats thing, which is kind of weird. I don't know where they're going with that one, but okay. This last thing showing off is that there's some accessories for the console. There's actually been a bit of a stink about this, because these console faceplates are only available for the new PS5 models. So it's the PS5 Pro and the PS5 Slim. So the OG PS5, which one I have, and well, a lot of people have, aren't getting these. They're not supporting it, which is pretty shit from Sony, gotta say. The controllers will be fine, but the console faceplates, it's both kind of frustrating in that the first time Sony actually comes out with some decent ones, it's not for the original console, and they've had this entire time where they could have done plates for the PS5. Like, they're easy to replace. They're not structurally required for the console at all. Like, it's very disappointing that they choose now to bring out a good one. Anyway, I think the rest of it is this is just more of a sizzle reel kind of thing, and it's out 2nd of October. We already knew that. Anyway, that's a longish enough video. I kind of skipped through a lot of it, but keep an eye on it yourselves. Anyway, we've got some new game announcements, or new game, singular. Shark Dentist, which is like there's the one creature in the world that doesn't need a dentist, because sharks replace their teeth, because technically they're not teeth, they're scales. They're just specialized scales. But anyway, Shark Dentist is effectively like the crocodile dentist game you might have played when you were a child. It's like you press down on the tooth, and if you press the wrong one, it slams shut and hurts your finger. But you could always tell which one it was because it was way stiffer than all the other ones. Anyway, Shark Dentist is effectively the same thing. If you get it wrong, you know, the shark bites your head off. Anyway, very dumb. And I kind of feel like you could have picked a different creature. But okay, one that would actually require a dentist. Anyway, moving on. Heartworm. I've been keeping my eye on Heartworm for a while. It is like another throwback, you know, PS1, Silent Hill, Resident Evil kind of thing. It's been really interesting to watch like the development, you know, following the developer, his updates on social media and that kind of thing. The game is eventually actually going to come out, and it's actually coming out pretty soon. It's coming at the end of this month, so 31st of July. We'll have Heartworm. We have Heartworm and Hollow Body. I really do need to finish Hollow Body. It's definitely before I start Heartworm. Anyway. Afterwards, we got a couple of games that are now getting a port. So up until now, Stalker 2 has not been available on PlayStation 5. It was a stealth console exclusive, because it was never announced as an exclusive, but, you know, has been exclusive to the Xbox and PC up until now. But will now be coming to PlayStation 5 later in the year. I don't think it has a release date yet. Yeah, it's just some stage late 2025. But yeah, it will eventually make its way over to PS5. Also, an interesting port that is probably only interesting to me is the Atelier Ryza trilogy series. So Atelier Ryza 1, 2, and 3. I'm not going to name the full games because their subtitles are ridiculous. I really like the Ryza games, or the Atelier games. It's kind of like... I guess like the kind of alchemy mobile game where you kind of mix two things together and you get a new thing, and then you mix that with something else and you get something else, and you mix that with it, and so on and so forth, and you get this big chain of mixing things together until you get like a cool item at the end of it. That's kind of the game. And then there's a JRPG mechanic around that. It's like a turn-based combat thing, which is okay, but it's really the mixing mechanic that I find more interesting. Anyway, it's the three of those games that are getting graphical improvements, but also adding some new scenarios, or adding some new characters, some new party members, stuff like that. And I believe it will have all of the various DLCs that came with those games. Anyway, some stage this year. It's not clear if it's coming as one bundle. You know, all three of the games for like one low price. I don't think so, because these games are still currently sold for like full price. Like they very rarely go on sale. Certainly the third one. I don't think I've seen the third one on sale yet. Anyway, last thing here is, yes, we have yet another live service game announces shutdown just 3 months after early access launch. It didn't even get a 1.0. So Steel Hunters is to close in October, just 3 months after it entered early access. It was a free-to-play future shooter. It's kind of like a mech war game kind of thing. Developed and published by Wargaming, people behind World of Tanks. So I guess they didn't think it was going to make World of Tanks money, so they decided not to push ahead with it. Today we share difficult news. We've made the decision to sunset Steel Hunters. You've given us so much passion and support, but unfortunately we've come to the conclusion that continuing development is not sustainable. Sustainable maybe isn't the right word here. Anyway, we know this isn't the news anyone wanted to hear, and we genuinely share in your disappointment. So servers will be around until some stage in early October, and then the game will be effectively unplayable. Speculation here is that one reason Steel Hunters wasn't able to compete is because Mecha Break is kind of recently released and is doing really well, and has possibly pulled a lot of players from Steel Hunters. I don't think that's necessarily true, because while Mecha Break did have a really strong start, it's kind of lost a lot of players now. So I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. We might be seeing the same news story about Mecha Break soon enough. But it is yet another example of the difficulties launching a live service game in the current climate. It's kind of a reminder of just how little time people have for another live service game. More than 40% of all playtime across PlayStation and Xbox in the US in January was spent on just 10 live service games. You could probably name all 10 of them because they've been around that long, I know. Fortnite, Roblox, Call of Duty, Overwatch, probably Marvel Rivals, I'm sure is a lot of that as well. But like, it's almost certainly the same. There's definitely like 5 games in there that are always in the top 10. And they're games from like a decade ago, nearly at this point. So trying to add the amount of time people would have invested into it, the amount of unlocks, potential actual money they've put in the game, and you want to pull them away. Or not that you want to, you think you can pull them away. It's just not happening. Stop trying. Those games need to die first. Anyway, free games over on the Epic Games Store. Remember, this is one of the few times that is actually free. You just have to sign up for Epic, so you don't have to pay a subscription. It's not like the PlayStation Plus free games or the Game Pass free games and so on. Anyway, Figment 2 Creed Valley, sequel to the original Figment, which was a free game last week. So if you were smart enough to grab it then, now you'll be able to grab the sequel as well. It is an action-adventure game set in the human mind. Nightmares are spreading chaos and have overrun once peaceful lands. Yada yada yada. It's kind of a musical game. It's kind of like musical Psychonauts in some ways. Anyway, it's Figment 2, and this second game that is free right now is Sky Racket. It mixes 2 classic genres, shoot 'em ups and brick breakers. Okay, this does feel a little bit like Baby's first video game, or you know, like a Unity tutorial that she spent a bit too much time on, but sure, whatever, it's free, give it a shot. Anyway, you have until Thursday before the selection changes again. Anyway, so coming to the middle of the month, so PlayStation Plus, Extra, and Premium are getting new additions. So this month is actually pretty decent. So Cyberpunk will be joining, and it's also joining as part of the 15th anniversary celebration. And the way that is working for PlayStation is that Cyberpunk is available right now. So you don't have to wait until Tuesday, which is the usual time when these games are added to the catalog. Cyberpunk has been available since the 9th of July. So if you haven't picked it up or didn't pick it up when it was massively on sale after the debacle of its launch, you'll be able to get it now. Cyberpunk 2077, PS5, PS4. I don't think it comes with the DLC. I think it's just the core game. On top of that, then we have Abiotic Factor, which is day one launch. So that won't be launching on Tuesday. It'll be launching when the game itself launches 22nd, which is later in the month. But it is very much a kind of what are all of the popular game genres on Steam right now? Almost. If you go back like 4 years, maybe. Anyway, rich character progression to the multiplayer open world survival crafting genre. Maybe 4 years isn't enough. You might have to go back like 8 years. But that was definitely a big thing. It still kind of is. Anyway, Banishers Ghost of New Eden. We played it on the channel. This was from Don't Nod, the team behind Vampire, which we also played on the channel. I liked it for the most part. I think it was a bit too long. But it doesn't help that I did literally everything in the game. Like, the main plot is probably not that long. But yeah, it's decent, and like if you're already signed up for the subscription, this is, you know, no additional cost. You can check out the first part. If I remember to do it, it's up here right now. You can look at it. All right, anyway, I'm gonna forget to do that. Bluey the video game, I'm sure it's fine. I don't know, I don't have kids, so I don't really know a whole lot about Bluey. Planet Zoo is a kind of park sim game. So like Roller Coaster Tycoon or that kind of thing, but it is effectively, you know, a zoo game, Zoo Tycoon, although I think that's a game itself. Risk of Rain 2 is only just recently released, I think, or has recently gone 1.0 or something, or maybe it's been out forever and time is meaningless. Anyway, roguelike deck builder type thing. I'm sure you probably already know what it is. Tropico 6 is kind of a parody totalitarian regime thing, which I don't know, maybe it's a little on the nose current times. And then New World Aeternum is the Amazon MMO that never really took off, but they're gonna keep trying to make it happen, I guess. Is this the MMO or is this the single player one? Action RPG. Don't remember, because I think they like stopped the MMO when it wasn't doing great and then just turned it into this. I think that's what this is. Anyway, and PlayStation Plus Premium is getting like the old, I think it's just finishing out the rest of the Twisted Metal series. So Twisted Metal 3 and 4. Twisted Metal 3 was originally a PlayStation game, and Twisted Metal 4 I think was originally PlayStation 2. Twisted Metal 4 originally released on no, it's original PlayStation as well. Okay. Anyway, I think that's probably all of the Twisted Metals then, for PS1 anyway. And then Twisted Metal Black. Is Twisted Metal Black the one that was cancelled, or did that actually come out? It's been so long, I don't quite remember. Anyway, those are some of the games you can play soon. What if you wanted to play something right now? Well, you've got two throwback games coming out this week, or came out this week. So Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4, the remaster / sort of remake. Now, I know this was like a big deal for people, like even my age, like growing up playing it on PS2 or what have you, original Xbox. I was never really into Tony Hawk, so I don't exactly have any nostalgia really for it, but I know people do have a lot of nostalgia for it. Whether it holds up or not, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Anyway, it's Tony Hawk, and then Patapon 1+2 Replay is the first two games kind of remastered and pushed onto home consoles. The original Patapon was a PlayStation Portable game, exclusive to the PSP, and I think Patapon 3 got a console release, but I don't think Patapon 1 and 2 ever did. Anyway, it is a rhythm action kind of tactics game, so you're kind of beating the drums to get your little pawns to do various things. And then the various different pawns have different actions depending on what rhythm you give them and what notes you play and so on. It's actually surprisingly deep game. Unfortunately, though, it is now time to talk about the worst part of the video game industry. So, Arcane Studios founder brands Game Pass unsustainable and damaging. So, this is kind of more fallout from the Xbox layoffs that happened last week. I did mention that Arcane Studios did have something to say about Game Pass and hadn't had a chance to actually read it yet, and I have read it anyway. So Rafael Colantonio, founder of Arcane Studios, creative director of most of the studio's games, Dishonored and Prey, does not like Game Pass and is not alone in his not liking of Game Pass. So he's kind of lamenting that people are not talking about the elephant in the room, which is, in his mind, Game Pass, when talking about all of these layoffs and how sustainable it is for Microsoft to keep investing in Game Pass. Is the infinite money machine is only going to print so much money, I guess. I don't know. I think Game Pass is an unsustainable model that has been increasingly damaging to the industry for a decade, subsidized by Microsoft's infinite money, but at some point, reality has to hit. I don't think Game Pass can coexist with other models. They'll either kill everyone else or give up. He was then followed by Larian Studios publishing director Michael Dowse, who had much more or less the same thing to say. What happens when all the money runs out is the most vocal concern in my network and one of the main economic reasons people I know haven't shifted to its business model. The infinite money thing never made any sense. So their basic intention is kind of what I also said about Game Pass. Is like, for the consumer, it's pretty good. Short term. In the long term, though, it is damaging to the industry and it will affect what games are made going forward. Because at the moment, we do have like diverse revenue streams. You know, you have Game Pass, then you can also sell your game the normal way. You know, you have live service games, you have other subscription services like PlayStation Plus, where the game comes to the service later. You know, it doesn't come like day one when the game comes out. And then obviously you have Steam sales and that kind of thing. But you have a lot of different ways of getting your game out. And the more popular Game Pass becomes, and the more the industry shifts towards Game Pass as a solution to game distribution, if you like, to game sales, Microsoft will then have a pretty strong hold over what games get added to Game Pass. So if you imagine a future where consumers aren't buying games piecemeal anymore, they're only signing up for the subscription service, and Game Pass is the most consumer-friendly subscription service because it gets you games on day one, kind of thing. Microsoft can mandate what games go on Game Pass. They can decide that, oh, this game won't make us back enough money, so we're not going to add it to Game Pass, it's too niche. Or, you know, we don't think enough people will play this. Or it's against our sensibilities, it's against our religious objections or whatever. I don't know, any number of reasons they could have to not put the game on Game Pass. Now, right now, that's fine, because you can go to other services, or you can just sell your game normally. But if it's a position where it's literally Game Pass or nothing else, how do you sell your game? You know, and it does stifle then creativity. It narrows the viewport for what kind of games get made. You know, is it only ever going to be live service games? Is it only ever going to be big blockbuster Call of Duty stuff? You know, we already have that problem in the games industry right now. It's basically really small indie games or giant hundreds of $1 million invested AAA games. That's it. There's no in between, and that's been increasingly stark, and Game Pass is only going to make that worse. The cannibalization of sales is what they're talking about here, is to basically say that you can sell your game or go on Game Pass, but you can't really do both. Now, some games are getting around this because obviously Game Pass is exclusive to Xbox, PC, whatever. It's not on PlayStation, so you can still sell your game on PlayStation. But if you're an Xbox first-party game, potentially you won't be doing that, or at least you'll be selling your game on PlayStation way later than you might have got at the beginning, when all of your advertising was happening and everyone was, you know, your game was in front of mind for everybody. May not be the best approach. But on top of that, you're taking the risk basically that whatever money Microsoft gives you to put the game on Game Pass will be more than what you would make just selling your game directly. If you're an Xbox first party, you don't get that. You don't get to make that decision. Your game is going on Xbox. But you also have Microsoft's infinite money for however long Microsoft decides to keep providing it. You know, if there are rumors that Microsoft is not particularly happy with Xbox's performance, they're pulling back from hardware potentially, and we just saw all of those layoffs as well. So how long the infinite money stream will continue for Xbox is debatable. But if you're a third-party developer and you're deciding between, do I take the guaranteed money of Game Pass, or do I take the maybe money and potentially more money, usually, of selling my game directly instead? And yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, especially if Microsoft makes it very appealing. Thing is, we don't know. We don't know how much Microsoft actually pays for games to go on Game Pass. It's assumed that like the bigger games get more money, the smaller indie games don't get as much. I'm sure there's a sliding scale somewhere. But the real question basically is if Game Pass does become the only service in town, effectively, what kind of effect it will have on the industry. And then if Microsoft pulls money from Xbox and Xbox can't fund Game Pass anymore, then what happens to the industry? You know, because the whole thing might collapse in that stage. So there are problems. There are industry problems for Game Pass. Consumer-wise, yes, it is good. But long-term, there are some issues there that would need to be addressed. Anyway, they did point out that Sony's lifecycle management way of working is much more preferable, rather. And that's basically saying that you don't put out the game day one on PlayStation Plus. You give it like a year of sales, 2 years maybe, or whatever, and then you get like another bump by adding it to PlayStation Plus. So you're effectively getting paid twice. You know, for the developer, that's obviously a much better approach, but you are taking the risk that you mightn't still be around in time. You know, if your game doesn't do well and you're able to keep the lights on, you mightn't be around long enough to, you know, get the cash boost from a PlayStation Plus feature. Anyway, Colantonia then suggested that Game Pass should be a back catalog product only, and that's how it doesn't hurt anyone. I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. If he's just saying that not day one games, I kind of agree, because it effectively just becomes PlayStation Plus, and I think for the industry at least, health-wise, that's the less damaging approach. But if he means that it's literally the only way to access Xbox's back catalog, I very much disagree with that one. On the other hand, if it did just mean that all of Xbox's back catalog was just available on Game Pass, you know, not just Xbox first party, but like literally any game that ever worked on Xbox ever, you just had it on Game Pass, like that would be a pretty good service. Anyway, moving on. We're not quite done with the Xbox layoff stuff, so Doom creator John Romero's studio not closed, as publishers express interest in saving cancelled game. So there was news that Xbox was behind the publishing of John Romero's next game, and that because of the Xbox layoffs of last week and the project cancellations, one of the cancellations was funding for this game. That wasn't going to go ahead, and they've had to lay off some people from Romero Games, and there was speculation that the studio itself would close. But no, it is not closing. I've kind of highlighted in red here a problem that I see in a lot of the Romero reporting, is that they just say his wife, Brenda. And she is CEO of Romero Games, but Brenda Romero is a game developer in her own right. You know, she's not just the wife of John Romero. Now, fine, John Romero has a big legacy, pedigree, whatever, co-creator of Doom, certainly, like that's a big pedigree. But this kind of just, I don't know what the term is, sexism, I guess, but you know, his wife is a game developer in her own right and lectures on game development management, and all sorts of other things as well. So just lumping her in as the wife is a bit shit. And I have seen it on a lot of reporting. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the story. I just thought I'd bring it up. Anyway, Romero Games is not closed. We are doing everything in our power to ensure that it does not come to that. Any suggestion otherwise is factually incorrect. Indeed, we were in the studio today to discuss next steps with the team. Romero Games has already been contacted by several other publishers which are interested in helping us bring the game across the finish line, because, you know, it's not like they'd have to start from scratch. The game is some way into development. I don't know how far into development it is, but it's going to have been some way into development. And, you know, a publisher not having to start the game from scratch, you know, potentially not having to inject as much cash into the studio as they would have if they were funding it from the beginning, but they'll also get the payoff of if they had been there from the beginning. Now, I don't know, contractually they might say, you were only here for a year, or you only funded us for a year, you're not getting like the full payout. I don't know, whatever decision they make. But there's certainly an enticing thing of me to put in not that much effort and still get all of the reward, you know. I'd say they'll get a publisher. All right, anyway, or hopefully they do. Moving on. So another story that we talked about last week that has had some additional wrinkles. Stop Killing Games proposals would make online games prohibitively expensive to create, argue EU lobbying group. Now, this lobbying group is a little suspect. Anyway, EU policymakers, based on the Stop Killing Games campaign's petition reaching 1 million names, 1 million signatures, that the European Commission will have to at least address it. Whether they actually debate it or not, we'll see. Anyway, EU policymakers may soon be debating whether developers and publishers should have the option to render online games unplayable. So the question put to them right now is that online-only games, live service games, what have you, once the servers shut down, you can't play them anymore. And you can make the argument that while it's not good, it's, I guess, understandable for like a free-to-play game. I disagree. It is like an artistic endeavor. People put a lot of their time and passion, skills into it. It is like a work of creation. It shouldn't just be arbitrarily shut down because it doesn't make money anymore. You know, if you think about how many things in the world that would be shut down and scrapped just because they don't make money, that's a lot of like national parks or public infrastructure and a lot of other things if you just randomly decided to shut them down just because. Or how many books that are out of print, or how many films that they don't make any pressings of their DVDs anymore, and so on, and you just decided to scrap them entirely because you're not making money off it. Like, that's kind of the argument here. That this product should... say product. This piece of culture, video game culture, shouldn't be disappeared memory holes just because, you know, number not going up anymore. Anyway, Video Games Europe is the name of the lobbying group. They are allegedly representing publishers and developers to the European Union. I would suggest they represent the publishers way more than they represent the developers, but whatever. So Video Games Europe is currently chaired by Warner Brothers Games, Senior Vice President Hester Woodliff, and he argues that the call to shut up shop must be an option for companies when an online experience is no longer commercially viable. I'm not making any money, so nobody should get to enjoy it anymore. Basically. When it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of the prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection laws. They are in their fucking hole. They're told, like, on the day sometimes. How long was Concord out for? Like a week? 2 weeks? And then it was pulled? Was that fair notice of prospective changes? How many times, like, fucking Destiny vaults its content? Like, I don't think it gives people a heads up when it's doing that. And even if it was giving them a heads up, that's not acceptable. They paid for a particular product and you're not giving it to them anymore. Anyway, Ross Scott, is that his name? I forget now. The guy behind Stop Killing Games. His name is here somewhere, but I'm failing to see it. Scott. Yeah, we have Scott. Where's his first name? Got Scott again. First name. Why can't I see his first name? Fuck. I'm gonna say it's Ross, because I don't know. Anyway, to basically say that, yeah, it's bullshit. And there's pointing out games that did do it right, as far as they're concerned, which is Gran Turismo Sport and Knockout City, which effectively made the game playable offline with all of the content. It's like, why can't you just do that? Anyway, private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. Then change the legislation that once you sunsetted the game and it's no longer being supported by you, people can still play it, but legally you're no longer responsible for it. Done. That was easy. Anyway, in addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. Stop making your games online only. There, done. Anyway, the board also includes representatives from Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. As like I'm saying, they're not really representing the developer here. They're representing the publisher. Anyway, so this is just effectively the Electronics Software Association of the US, which is the other video game lobbying group before the US. Anyway, there's a much longer document out there that goes into a little bit more of the detail, but the bottom line is that we want money, and if we're not making money, then you don't get to play it anymore, basically. So, bottom line, money and the lack of control publishers would have over community-run private servers. So they still want to be able to control your private server, even though they've given up supporting the game. Anyway, they say there would need to be new legal framework. Well, it's a good thing that the EU policymakers are planning to debate it then. Because that's kind of the whole point of the fucking petition. For people doing things with games without direct support or oversight from the company who made the game and are still somewhat liable for it. Again, the liability thing comes up a lot. How liable they are has never really been tested, because there are like mods, emulators that are somewhat of a gray area, I suppose, but they exist. And there are people making mods of games that are no longer sold, you know, but are still accessible, kind of thing. Anyway, as I said, Stop Killing Games did kind of address some of these things. They did not address the longer document, but they did address this bullshit, basically, specifically saying that it can be done. These two games did it. Knockout City was an online-only game. Gran Turismo Sport did have an online-only element to it. Both of them were able to make all of their content available offline. It can be done. Stop being shitheads, pretty much. So yeah, we'll see more about this if and when it ever does make it to EU policymakers. But for now, the video game industry, in Europe at least, is against the proposal. I know. Try to be shocked. Okay, some somewhat better news. So earlier last month, I think, SAG-AFTRA were saying that they had come to an agreement with publishers about the generative AI use of their voices, as well as like pay disputes and stuff like that, on a strike that had been going on for like almost a year at this point. And that they had come to an agreement and that they were just putting it out to a vote to the union members. Take a little while to collect all of the votes, and it's come back that yes, they're in favor of it. So 95% of union members approve the deal. So it's almost unanimous. So the new agreement includes some pay rises, as well as 3% increases, which is like inflation protection. The retirement fund will be increased as well. But kind of the bigger one, which is around like generative AI kind of stuff, is that consent and disclosure requirements for AI digital replica use, and the ability for performers to suspend consent for the generation of new material during a strike. So basically, you can't make a generative AI version of someone's voice unless they give you consent, and that consent is narrow to the product that you're making. You can't just take their voice from like one game and put it into another game. Like, you need to get consent for individual performances. And on top of that, if the performer themselves goes on strike, so does the digital replica. So you can't keep using it in the game if they're on strike. If they're on strike, so is the replica, effectively. Which is pretty, like, it's pretty good protective stuff. Like, it's not... Like, my preference would have been just outright ban fucking stuff. But I guess that was a bridge too far. And, you know, down the line, you could make the next union agreement might be to, like, phase out the uses of generative AI and for different use cases and what have you. Anyway. But yeah, that strike had been going on for quite a while. There was a strike even earlier than that for similar reasons, 2023. This has been a big problem, basically, ever since ChatGPT 1 hit the scene. Anyway, moving on. Last thing. This is somewhat more of a PSA and also somewhat of a Nintendo getting a little bit shitter. So discontinues the Switch Game Vouchers service in January of next year. So the Switch Game Vouchers, if you're not familiar, this effectively allowed you to pay about €100. $100 was 95 something, I think. And you would get 2 of these vouchers. And these vouchers would be redeemable for any game in the voucher library. And a lot of those were like first-party Nintendo games, for the most part. But there'll be a lot of other games in there as well. And you might recall, if you've looked into the eShop lately, Nintendo don't put their games on sale very often. So even now, Super Mario Odyssey or Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, for some fucking reason, is still $60. But a lot of those games are still like full price. You know, they very rarely go on sale. So if you got 2 of these vouchers, 2 games would ordinarily been like €120, €130 maybe in some places, you were getting for €100 instead. So it was a pretty good deal, which they're discontinuing because now Donkey Kong Bonanza, $80. Or sorry, Super Mario Kart World, $80. Bonanza I don't think is $80. The Switch 2 versions of Legend of Zelda I think are similar, like $70, something like that. But the point is, you'd be getting 2 games ordinarily $160, euros, whatever, for only $100. So they're like, nah, that's too much. That's too much of a discount. You don't get to have that. So yeah, they're kind of making it a little bit shitter. So purchase a pair of digital tickets that could be redeemed on 2 select digital Switch games, usually at a cheaper overall price than if they were bought individually. So vouchers will remain available for purchase up until the end of January of next year. Purchase vouchers are valid for 1 year, so this is something I didn't know, because I still have 1 of these that I haven't used. I forget what game I was waiting for, and it's almost certainly out at this point. They're only valid for 1 year. I think mine has actually expired. I think I need to check on that. But if you buy a voucher in January 29th, we'll say, of 2026, you'll still have it available until 2027. And Switch games are being added to the list still, and will continue to be added to the list. So you don't need to spend it like right now, unless you're coming up on the expiry thing, and you might want to just get them anyway. Because potentially Switch 2 games might be added to it, but I don't think so. I think it's only still like original Switch games that are being added. But one important caveat, of course, is that if you do decide to buy them, you can't refund them. So do keep that in mind. Game vouchers cost like $99, again, like I said, like $100. Get 2 full price games, which ordinarily would have been about $60, so you're like getting it for like $20 discount. They are only eligible for Switch 1 games. Okay, well, that answers that. So you could get like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, just the 2 games for $100. Super Mario Wonder was probably the latest one. I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was the game I was waiting for, which is out a long time now. So yeah, that's almost certainly expired. Fuck. Anyway, all right, we'll move on. What silly things happening in the community? Right, Lord of the Rings Online players finally complete the Great Hobbit run by incinerating themselves in Mount Doom. So this is a community thing that happens on the Lord of the Rings Online game where they get a bunch of Hobbit players, level 1, and they run from Hobbiton all the way to Mount Doom without leveling up. So they try not to engage in any part of the game, don't take on any quests, don't even pick up any gear, stuff like that. You're just straight line, go to Mount Doom. And if you've ever played any kind of MMO, you'll probably know that games are zoned for different levels of player. And the level at and around Mount Doom is 112. And these are level 1 characters, so they're getting like one-shotted. Easy. I mean, they're getting one-shotted way before that. They're probably getting one-shotted at like Rivendell or something. Anyway, so that's going to require a lot of meandering and waiting for enemy mobs to pass and that kind of thing. So it might not surprise you that this is the first time the community have actually made it to Mount Doom. This is the third time I think they've done it, and this is only the one time it's ever actually happened. Took about 7 hours. In the book, it takes about 6 months, so, you know, it's new world record, I guess. There's a link somewhere. So there's a pretty funny link here where, you know, of the group that did manage to make it, I don't think everybody made it, but of the group that did manage to make it, all of the hobbits, and they celebrate by just yeeting themselves into Mount Doom. Now, you're supposed to have the ring on you when you do this. This is effectively the end of the game. But some people forgot the ring. It's still back in Frodo's house. They forgot to pick it up, which is pretty funny. Anyway, but I think it's fun to see like a game that is fucking 20 years old at this point. It's a very old game anyway. Exactly how old the game is. That people are still playing it and still having fun and still coming up with stupid things that they can do with it and still like amassing a community. Like there was a lot of people there. Anyway, elsewhere on the community, GameStop is auctioning off the staple and stapler that damaged a customer's Nintendo Switch 2. The staple as well. Oh my, they're really spoiling you. Anyway, it's pretty dumb, but it's like a charity event thing. So it's auctioned in aid of Children's Miracle Network. The current highest bid is about 100k. It's, you know, it's not bad for a fucking stapler. Anyway, the black stapler used by a GameStop associate who, in a moment of launch night excitement and misjudged enthusiasm, stapled a receipt directly to a customer's new Nintendo Switch 2 box, puncturing the cardboard and screen in one swift motion. So you may recall Staplegate a while ago, that because of the way Nintendo decided to package the Nintendo Switch 2, the screen is like, it's like right there, and the cardboard, and there's like no protection. So a staple just went straight through the cardboard into the screen. Features authentic field use, wear and tear throughout, and retired immediately from service. The stapler now stands as a retail legend born from a half-second decision. So it's kind of funny. Get in on the joke kind of thing. Anyway, we're going to leave Anthony of the Hawk playing in the background. Anyway, that's your news for the 7th to the 13th of July, 2025. That stuff about Krafton and Unknown Worlds is a bit messy. It's a bit gross that it seems like they were trying to fuck them over, and that they did the work. You know, they were ready to get the game out. They did their side of the deal for the 250 million bonus. And then Krafton have just played shitheads and tried to stiff them on it. Again, it depends on who you believe, whether it was ready for early access or were they trying to get it out early so that they could get the bonus. Is Krafton right saying that if we pushed it out now, it would actually damage the IP, so it does have to be delayed to 2026? The fact that there's money attached to it makes the whole thing really messy. Like, so much money attached to it. If you had said, like, the same thing without the 250 million bonus, you'd say, sure, delay it, whatever. A delayed game is eventually better, whatever the quote is. But the money makes it a bit, yeah, who's right here. It is appealing to think that it's, big bad corporate stooge Krafton just trying to fuck them over out of their bonus. And that is the side I'm coming down on, that they are trying to fuck them over. But, we don't have the full details, and if the lawsuit does go ahead, we will get the full details. So we can wait and find out. But right now, it does look like Krafton are just being the corporate dickheads that we kind of assumed they were. Elsewhere, the Ghost of Yotei presentation, I mean, it wasn't anything like, wow, stand out to it, but like it looks like it'll be a good game. And I still haven't played Assassin's Creed Shadow. At this point, I might not. I might just wait for Ghost of Yotei in this case. I have somewhat of a plan to do all of the Assassin's Creeds in the same way that I have the plan to do all of the Final Fantasies, and we've stopped at 6. So I don't, that may never happen, but it's in my head as a thing I might do someday. Anyway, Stalker 2 making its way over to PS5. I'm kind of low-key interested in Stalker, and I haven't played the original, so I think there is a PlayStation port of it, so I might check it out soon. Elsewhere, we had a bit more fallout from the Xbox layoffs, the Game Pass discourse coming back. Developers are, like, in some ways it is helpful to like smaller developers because they get a guaranteed cash for their game. They can like pay their bills, pay any like additional collaborators they might have had, and so on. But as an overall thing, if it ever does become the de facto service of the industry and the de facto sales pipeline effectively for the industry, and then Microsoft pulls the plug on it, that would destroy video games basically. So it is a little concerning. Like, as I said, consumer wise it's a pretty good deal, but industry wise it's not healthy. Anyway, Romero Games possibly managing to keep the door open and get their game out eventually is like a win. Hopefully they do manage to get that happening, and the publisher doesn't, fuck them over, knowing that the studio's lifeline is effectively on the studio's viability is on the line, is what I wanted to say. Because they do know that, like, if they don't get a publishing deal, that the studio will have to close. And the publisher knows that, and you would hope that they don't use that as leverage, but of course they're going to. They're gonna do it. Like, anyway. What else we were talking about? I was just talking about it and I've already forgotten. This is what always happens. I need to keep like a list of the stories we talked about beside me because they just go out of my head. Anyway, I'm going to call it there. That's me for today. I will talk to you guys next week. Have a good one. See you then. Bye.